Hi, I'm Janelle Benjamin, founder and CEO of All Things Equitable, and happy to be with you for another episode of Twice as Hard. I'm here today with my guest, Dr. Nika White. She's a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant from Greenville, South Carolina, and I'm really happy to have her on the show. Dr. Nika White, welcome.
Thank you so much, Janelle. It's very great to be in conversation with you today, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity for me to share with your audience and your platform.
I'm really happy that you're able to share as well. I know that you've been a practitioner in this space for quite some time with so many insights to share, and particularly around this notion that Black women have of having to work twice as hard. I see you out there grinding, doing your thing, all the things, all the promotion, all the work that it takes to run your own consulting firm. I understand it all too well. But why don't you share with me, I guess, for your a little bit of your story, like where did that experience working twice as hard come from for you?
Sure. I love this question. And I do believe that many women like me and who look like me have to work twice as hard. And so it's something that I really am passionate about. So I often share that the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion found me. It was not something that I set out to explore as part of my career trajectory. But if I were to take inventory of all of the things that I had associated myself with, it had a lot to do with giving voice to the voiceless and helping to ensure no one was left behind. And so I think that it was in me. My background is in marketing communications. I
Mhm.
spent a number of years working in that industry. And when you think about the work of marketing communications, your primary goal is to be smart marketing partners to your clients whose consumer constituencies represent diverse America. And as a Black woman in that space, at the time, I remember sitting and thinking how much I love the industry. It was always on time, on budget, on strategy. I felt that I was going to be in that discipline for the long haul. And so I recall looking around and just reflecting on, well, if I love this career path so much, why aren't there others that look like me that's also taking advantage of what I felt was such a really, great career path. And I couldn't let that go. So I remember I was in between both the Greenville, South Carolina office of the agency that I work for, which is where it was headquartered, as well as New York. They had a
Mhm.
presence in that market. And I saw that there was greater diversity in the New York market. That's obvious because it's the advertising capital of the world and it's a great level of diversity in that market. But it still was a market that was challenged around diversification.
Mhm.
So to get to your question, Janelle, I remember going to the president CEO who was very hands-on at the time. I had this dialogue, really just addressing that our BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal was to become the most admired agency. So I thought, why are we not being intentional to really try to create greater diversity and representation across many different demographics within the agency so that we can certainly be smart marketing partners to our clients. He listened intently, asked some very thought provoking questions. And ultimately, at the end of that conversation, he said, Nika, I agree. We're going to do this. You're going to lead it. Now tell us how. So fast forward, I had to get really smart, really quick about how do we do this work that allows for people like me that really have a role to play in helping to create organizations that are higher performing, that are adding value because of the perspective that we bring to those
Mhm.
environments. And so I had to work twice as hard then, even as I was
Mhm.
gravitating to this space and this work. And
Mhm.
I continue to see that from so many other professionals who are in similar situations in their career paths.
Yeah, that is an awesome story, and I can attest to the fact that your marketing is just absolutely beautiful. I got lost in the rabbit hole the other day on your website and just seeing your portfolio and your media page, and I just thought, wow, it's all so polished, all so
Oh, thank
beautiful.
you.
Everybody would be doing well to be working definitely with you. Let's talk a little bit about, I guess, how that notion of working twice as hard is presenting for you through your consulting business. Are you finding it difficult, this sort of post George Floyd era in which we find ourselves, in which lots and lots of organizations claim to want to do the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're bringing us in droves. Um, and still I'm feeling personally, I'm in the greater Toronto area, but there's a little bit of a hesitancy from some, right? Or they want you to come in and they want to oppress us in some way, or like limit the scope of what it is that we're going to be doing? What are you seeing where you are?
It's such an interesting conversation to have because you would think that given the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that maybe there was a greater openness of organizational leaders to want to lean and rely heavily upon the lived experience and the expertise of those practitioners in this space that also have um, direct experience because they've lived it, right? And so as a
Right.
Black woman in this work, I have found it to be quite interesting that even as, I'm in this work of DEI, there's still a question of the authority and the credibility. Janelle, quite honestly, I have had clients, one in particular that I'm thinking about, to ask for all of my raw data from a cultural DEI assessment that I did, simply because this particular leader wanted to be able to share it with another vendor partner that also does research to check my work. And so, it's just amazing, even when we are in the space of helping others to do this work effectively and very thoughtfully with the lens of equity and inclusion and belonging, that we still find ourselves even having to prove our own worth and to prove our own expertise and credibility. And so it shows forth across so many different organizations, regardless of who you are. Even when I was in marketing communications, of course, I saw it then, but even now that I am operating very specifically into a space that you would think people would have greater wherewithal to be at least a bit more careful about
Hmm.
the harm
Right.
that it still occurs. And so, yes, working twice as hard as even an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship is hard in and of itself. It's not just about knowing your craft and your trade and being able to
Right.
do that work effectively, but it's also
Hmm.
about bringing the business savvy, the business acumen in, to know how to grow a business, to know how to lead a company. And so, as a Black founder and business owner, I'm also seeing some disparities, like many others, in just the navigating the journey of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, you're sort of triggering me, the twice as hard phenomena, and the ways in which we are asked to prove ourselves time and time again. That prove it again bias it shows itself in so many situations in my life, right? Where, you've produced something and it's like, can you do it again this way? Or, like you said, having someone else double check or fact check what it is that you've put out there. And again, just that lack of awareness in which they're harming you, the practitioner, in those moments. It's problematic, it's damaging. And how do you navigate those things, right? Are you telling people, well, hold on a moment, we're not going to do, like, what are the boundaries, I guess, that you're setting for yourself?
So I think that the education piece is critical.
Mhm.
I made a choice to go into this field and this discipline and this industry, and I think that's important to bring to the conversation because not everyone has the emotional capital to endure this type of questioning of one's credibility. But I think that as DEI practitioners, we have made the decision to hold a little bit of that because we know that that's part sometimes of the work and the journey.
Right.
So my approach to dealing with that, navigating that, is first and foremost, I don't believe in diluting the message, even though this person that I may be communicating with and educating is a client. I think that's part of my role. And I'm very upfront when I enter into relationships and partnerships to communicate that. You're hiring me for my expertise. And so
Mhm.
if there's something about the way in which you are navigating the process of engaging deeply with this work in a meaningful way that is
Mhm.
harmful or that provides a lesson to be learned, I want to be able to bring that to this relationship because that's part of what you're hiring me for.
Right.
And then two, people don't know what they don't know. And so I do believe in extending grace and accepting grace, meeting people where they are, but not leaving them there.
Mhm.
I don't want to give people a pass. I think that accountability is needed, especially for this work. But I think that it starts with building that rapport of trust. And it's trust that, part of my boundaries is I want you to trust me to be able to guide you with real conversations that helps you to be better in this work. And I also, want to be trusted to do this work, right? And
Mhm.
so The navigation is all about setting those boundaries, being very communicative, and building a solid relationship of trust so that when you do have to have those tough conversations, you have enough deposits that have been created that those withdrawals, or perceived withdrawals, I should say,
Mhm.
are not lasting. It does not, compromise the relationship.
Let's talk a little bit now about just the intersection of being a Black woman.
Yes.
And, through these conversations in the series, I'm having some viewers sort of doubt the veracity of the things that we're sharing. Of course, that's common. Um, but how do we let people know that the experiences that we have are truly genuine, right? That the intersection of our Blackness and our femaleness, our womanhood, uh, gives us unique experiences. Some of the things you're sharing, it sort of begs the question for some of the audience would be, well, it can be hard for a man who's an entrepreneur, or it can also be hard for a white woman who's a business owner, right? What makes your experience, Dr. White, so unique?
So I believe in taking up space in whatever environment that I may find myself in. I have not always been there, but I think that part of showing up as our authentic selves is giving ourselves the agency and the permission to know that we are whole as we are.
Mhm.
And as a result of that, we belong in every space. My friend Minda Harts often says, yes, we belong in every space, but not every space deserves us, right? And I truly do believe that. So I think that getting people to a place to where they can get proximate to the lived experiences of women of color,
Mhm.
we have to amplify what those experiences are, right? We can't be afraid to talk about it. We can't be
Yeah.
afraid to socialize around the difference and the disparities that exist between our lived experiences and those of dominant culture. And I think that's also bringing to the conversation the need for those champions and those allies to realize that part of their role, to help provide and champion and advocate for women of color, when there's so much discrimination and inequities that exist, is for them to get close to the problems, right? They have to get proximate to the problems, which means that, again, not everyone has the emotional capital to help bring people along, but for those who do, I think that we have to be really true to our stories. We can't dilute our stories. We can't just conform and pretend that the way in which maybe we feel like we're compromised in workspaces and other environments is not happening. So we have to
Yeah.
be brave to bring that to the fore, share that information. And hopefully through sharing of that information, people are hearing it from so many different individuals, so many different angles, that they will eventually start to pay closer attention to it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's repetition, I believe, is kind because it provides clarity, and clarity is kind.
Mhm.
And so I can't expect for you to understand completely if I'm also not willing to share completely what it is that maybe I am experiencing. Now, I
Yeah.
also realize that that requires having that psychological safe environment in which you feel like you can do that, right?
Right.
So we do need to be thoughtful about how do we find a sense of those who are in solidarity with us, where we can share that information.
I think that's really important. And for me, I know personally, I haven't found my champions, right, in any workplace that I've been in. It's been really difficult for me to navigate, corporate spaces as a Black woman, without those people who can sometimes intervene when we can't speak up, or call us in when we're being passed over or overlooked, or our opinions are being discounted. Well, no, let's go back to what she had to say. I think there was something to that. Like I'm not finding
Yeah.
those people. And so I think, for me, it was important to have a variety of voices through this series to expose exactly what you're saying, right? The number of stories from women, Black women in all parts of the globe, who are having similar experiences and similar stories, right? Like we're not all making it up, from the UK to France to, Greenville, South
I'm not
Carolina, like,
making it up. Believe
right?
us, believe our stories. Yeah. And that's another reason why, Janelle, I'm so big on data, especially data that's evidence-based that can inform how in which an organization may create special strategic initiatives that can lead towards sustainable impact. Because without the data, we will perceive that there's no problem, right? Well, that's
Mhm.
not my experience. And so it's probably not the experience of anyone else. But where you sit in an organization determines what you see. And what
Right.
you see becomes your lens. And your lens has great ability to inform your decision making, the way in which you perceive certain individuals,
Mhm.
and and how in which you may provide support or not provide support, right? And
Right.
so I am I am a true advocate of standing in our truth and helping people to see what's not obvious for them. And sometimes it does take, a brave spirit to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't note your sort of tagline there, making DEI practical. If that's what you do, just share, I guess, a little bit about how you do that. Because for me, it's really difficult at times to get people who are not justice minded. Like you said, it's been something in your core from birth, from a young girl. It's been the same for me. It's difficult to get people to get that inclusion lens who just don't have it naturally, right? So I love that you're writing this book, Inclusion Uncomplicated, right? A transformative guide to simplify DEI and a presumably making DEI practical. So tell me a little bit about that, how you do that, and create that lens for people who just don't naturally have it.
Yeah, no, I love this question, and it is so important. So I am a firm believer that oftentimes resistance is because of a lack of clarity. And sometimes that resistance and that lack of clarity is just simply because the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging can feel very daunting. It can
Mhm.
feel very complex. And because it is, the reality of it is that it can be, certainly, as we think about just the complexity of all the many dimensions of diversity. And that certainly can create a challenge as we are thinking about how to really hold space for each of these dimensions of diversity in a way that's very meaningful. And so it takes a lot of work. And I think that those sentiments causes some people to sit on the sidelines and feel like, well, I can't engage because I don't know how. Well, the
Mhm.
lack of know-how should not be a crutch or an excuse, because there are way too many resources out there that abound, that helps us to learn how. And so for me, I think that part of my platform is to help the organizations that we work with to take this really complex topic and try to make it practical by simplifying it in smaller steps so that people remain engaged. They can leverage that as momentum to gain traction for maybe some deeper goals that they are going to find placing into their strategic plans going forward. So yes, inclusion uncomplicated is just that. How do we uncomplicate this work? Which I think doing so provides an entry point for more people to engage
Mhm.
meaningfully, which
Mhm.
means that we're going to be able to emerge stronger around creating a more inclusive society and equitable society. And so, yes, I'm excited about book number 3 that's going to release later this year, 2022, in the fall, in partnership with Forbes Books. And so really looking forward to this being a great tool, a
Mhm.
practical tool to help people to know how to navigate the complexity of DEI.
And so are you giving guidance on strategic planning, on how to achieve equity? Like what is it, like a little taste of what they're going to get in that book?
It's a little bit of all of the above. I mean,
Yeah.
it's definitely about providing, practical tools and tips to help people to actualize DEI at the personal level, because this
Mhm.
work begins at the personal level first and foremost,
Yeah.
and then as well as within organizations. If we think about the fact that people are the ones who are running organizations, they're the ones who are determining systems, processes, procedures, they're helping to shape culture. We have to make sure we're tackling the effectiveness of DEI by both addressing the individual and then
Yeah.
also how the individual can take their sphere of influence and then allow it to shape what's happening within the confines of organizations that we may find ourselves affiliated with or a part of.
Yeah, and then you've got a great sphere of influence, that's for sure. I would say, when I was, working in even on Bay Street here, which is like the quote unquote Wall Street of the United States, I had some experiences, Dr. White, about, being bullied in the workplace, being marginalized, being sidelined, being held back, right? Knowing that I was twice as good and overqualified for certain roles and still being discounted because, I was younger then, or, whatever the excuse was in the moment, right? Now that I'm older, I know a lot of that had to do with, my Blackness. A lot of that had to do with the fact that I was also a woman, in addition to also being young at the time. And so I want to hear a little bit about your personal story, like your journey to this point, to know that, you've worked twice as hard, it's paid off, but you've had, I'm sure, some of these painful experiences that have propelled you to stay in this fight, right? Like, what keeps you going? What keeps you driven to do this work?
Well, so Janelle, I have deep convictions for this work. I
Mhm.
I care about getting beyond just surface solutions, because I don't
Mhm.
believe that approaching this work in a surface manner really leads to sustainable solutions. And so for me, it's about peeling back all the layers and getting to the
Mhm.
root causes of issues that can be compromising diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, and
Right.
solving for it there. So the heart of my work is all about creating transformative environments, with a great level of intentionality around the lens of diversity and inclusion. I think that's critically important. I am also a mother of a
Yeah.
devoted mom, in fact, to a neurodivergent son and a strong social activist daughter. So that's part of my why as well. I believe in leaving no one behind. I believe that part of what separates individual leaders and organizations that are doing this work at just a bare minimum level to those who are operating at an exemplary level around their
Mhm.
commitment to DEI has everything to do with intentionality and planning,
Right.
and
Mhm.
a deepened commitment to make sure we aren't just approaching this work from an activity perspective, but from an impact perspective. Activity has start and end dates. If we think
Mhm.
about it from an impact perspective, it forces us to look at systems, policies, procedures, and culture.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we can institute change. I tend to believe that my pathway, towards adulthood, was pretty normal to many different individuals. I grew up in a home where I was fortunate to have both of my parents. They were in a very loving relationship, still healthy in a loving relationship today, and so that's a privilege that I believe shaped my life. Not everyone has that advantage. I also grew up in a home where it was always expressed to me and supported, in terms of being able to reach any type of goal that I, desire to achieve. And so
Mhm.
that shaped me as well. It caused me to be quite ambitious. And so when I talk about, your question of the complexity of the intersecting identities of being a woman, and a Black woman at that, I consider some of those challenges. And part of those challenges is that it forced me to have this ambition that was on level 10 plus, right? And I remember being told in a work environment that maybe some of the reasons that I was not on this trajectory of upward mobility to the same pacing as my white male counterparts was because I was too ambitious. Well, what does that look like? What does that mean? And yes, I recognize that as about myself, and I am ambitious. And one time I saw it as something that was a negative, but it shouldn't be. And so it
Mm.
really surprises me how there are people that are intimidated by high level of ambition of a Black woman,
Why did you
instead
see it
of,
as a negative?
well, I
What
saw
was
I saw that as a negative because it was presented as you're being too ambitious, just be patient, just wait.
mm.
And my question was, are you saying that same thing to the white male counterparts that I'm seeing, with the presented with opportunities for upward mobility at a
Yeah.
much faster rate? And I felt very confident that it wasn't because they were performing at a much higher level,
Mhm.
um, I saw it as, again, just the disparities that exist within our systems.
Mhm.
And so it was very disheartening. And now, and that was, early in my career, but now when I look back on that, I was not the problem. My ambition wasn't the problem. It was the organization's inability to see that there was bias that was creeping into those decisions, that
Right.
was just perpetuating this cycle of disparity that Black women, and other, professionals of color were experiencing. So I
Yeah,
won't say
it's
that I was unique, but yeah.
No, I'm learning myself that, that notion that I was raised with, I was told point blank period, you have to be twice as good and work
Yes.
twice as hard as your counterparts. I'm realizing that, that has been drummed into a lot of us.
Yeah.
Um, and it causes us to be overachievers, high achievers,
Yes.
and to be
Exactly.
doing all the
Exactly.
things. Hmm.
Exactly. And
Hmm.
it leads to burnout, it leads to stress and anxiety, it leads to compromised health.
Yeah.
And so it's just all of that's not worth it. But that's what we have to do. That at least is what society has taught us that we have to do.
Yeah.
And I really would love to see us reimagine, the ways in which we can minimize that and even eventually eliminate it and eradicate it altogether, because
Yeah.
it's not how it should be. Yeah.
And how does that show up for you in your motherhood journey, like with your kids? Are you teaching your daughter to be twice as good and work twice as hard, or are you teaching her different things now?
The honest answer is yes. I have very much been driven towards imparting into her this drive of excellence, this drive of always going above and beyond. And to be completely transparent, there have been times now, because my daughter she's my adult daughter. She's no longer the little Hannah Joy White. She's my adult daughter. So the
Mhm.
parenting and the coaching looks a little different. And so now, I find myself, because she's about to graduate from college, but I find myself as I'm interacting and coaching with her to say stuff like, are you taking care of yourself though? I realize that you have this, and that going on, but are you taking care of yourself? Are you
Mhm.
resting? Because I see that the apple didn't fall far from the tree, right? She is taking on a lot of my personality and my work ethic. And in many ways, that's great. But I do worry as a mom that sometimes she is so driven that could that be compromising her health, her well-being, her mental state,
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's unfortunate. And while I speak this truth, my hope is that it's inspiring maybe others who are in a similar situation to think about how we can reimagine those conversations we're having with our seeds to, yes, let them know that we want you to strive towards excellence,
Yeah.
but not to a point to where it becomes to the detriment of your health and your well-being. And so,
Yeah.
yeah,
I want to
yeah.
have I want to reimagine that into workplaces, right? Where our employers are almost, mothering of us. They see the Black woman for what she is and what she's gone through, and
We don't get that
understands that,
nurturing.
right? Understands
Yeah.
that, the workplace is taking a toll on us and that our mental health is being impacted, and to go above and beyond to prepare us, to mentor us, to give us those
Um,
opportunities.
yeah.
um Hopefully they'll be watching the series and
Yeah,
learning.
I hope so
Hopefully.
too. I will tell you that on the silver lining around this is that now as a founder and a leader of my own company, I hold space for an outlet for the women in my organization to feel completely free to extend grace to themselves as we are, again, accepting grace and extending grace, because we're going to make mistakes. I i don't want the people that fall under my leadership to perceive that in order to make it successfully within any organization requires you to be perfect. There's no such thing, right? So we have to be willing to allow people to fall forward. One of our core values at NWC is about continuous improvement, and
Mhm.
it's also about constructive candor. And so I also have this strong sense of responsibility to help the women that fall under my leadership to grow and thrive and reach their full potential. So that means that we have to be able to have the constructive, candid conversations, right? I don't want to leave people where they are. I want there to be this growth opportunity in everything that we do. But I also want them, as they're growing and they're falling forward, to not see their mistakes as being defining. And so
Yeah.
it's definitely a balance that I think is so important for leadership in general, but particularly for those who are finding themselves leading and mentoring and sponsoring and guiding and coaching women of color.
Yeah, our mistakes absolutely shouldn't be, perceived as a barrier or hindrance, or go to our detriment.
No.
And so often it does, right? It's a stumbling block, and it's all about how you pick yourself up
Yes.
and change your trajectory of your life, of your career. You don't let, that setback keep you back. It becomes a setup for something better.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to reading your book. I'm looking forward to being on your podcast. Tell us a little bit about your
Yes.
podcast before you go, because I know you've got a fantastic one.
Well, thank you so much, and I so appreciate you accepting our invite. Cannot wait for our podcast
Mhm.
community to hear more about the work that you're doing, Janelle. But it's called Intentional Conversation. So it is a podcast community where we intersect conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion with leadership and business. And we bring in guest co-hosts that we really just, help center their voice of authority around a variety of topics that
Mhm.
are relevant to the broad, area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it's
Mhm.
Friday from 11 to 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, and it is a podcast. And so for those who really like to get the information live and be in the midst of the direct dialogue, to ask questions directly, to contribute to the conversations, that's really an opportunity to do so. But then, of course, we always capture the recording and we're able to share that out. And so people can go to our YouTube channel. And soon we're actually going to be taking the content from the podcast and making it into a podcast for those that like to get their content in that capacity.
That is awesome. I love hearing it. And tell us where to find it, because I know you're on Facebook, you're on LinkedIn Live. How can people connect if they want to watch the podcast and participate on those live conversations?
No, so simply they can go to the website for the firm, and it's nikawhite.com, and under resources there's a link for intentional conversations, and that's where you can get links to all of the replays, links to connect with our YouTube channel, or even to register so that you can be on the invite list to receive the information for the weekly sessions that occur.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. If you've been enjoying this episode, don't forget to click like and subscribe down below. Head on over to nikawhiteconsulting.com, right? Or is it just Nika White?
It's simply
Just
nikawhite.com.
nikawhite.com, and get connected so that you can watch me on her show
Yes,
in a couple
absolutely.
of weeks. All
Absolutely.
right. Thank you so much again, Nika. Lovely to have you.
Oh, it was lovely to be here, and I'm so grateful for you sharing your platform with me. And again, just being in community with you, I look forward to continued dialogue.
Likewise. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again for another episode of Twice as Hard.